In this series of videos, I'm showing you how to read from and write to a SQL Server database from C# using all code and not using any of the drag and drop wizards. And now in this video, I want to show you how to start writing the code. But first of all, I want to explain with a class diagram what all the code files are going to contain. So here I've created a class diagram, and the first class here is my form, main form. So that's the code directly behind my graphical user interface, my GUI. So you'd see here that the bottom section is for any of the methods that are on my form, my frame. You would see a match here for each one. So the insert, there'll be a button insert learner, update, button update, delete, delete, clear, clear, and so on. I haven't put in the 4 navigation buttons. I've just said that they should be included there. That's just to keep it a little bit shorter. So they're the methods that are behind the form, the bottom half. On the top half are basically variables that I need, that some of these methods down here are going to need to share certain values, and they will be a link to that DAO class. I'll discuss that in a second. A list of learners, so there's going to be a list of learners, like an array of learners that can grow and shrink, that the GUI needs access to, and then also needs to know which position in the list we're currently at, so what the current record is as we scroll backwards and forwards through. Now, here this is called the learner DAO. DAO stands for Data Access Object, so an object for accessing data. So traditionally, you don't put the database code in behind the GUI, and you don't put, then there's this model here as well, the learner, which I'll explain. Now I just want to add in some labels here. So here, your GUI code, this is known as your view. Apart from that, we have our DAO. This is known as your controller. And up here, we're using one class called a learner. This is our model. So this framework is typically known as a model view controller. So the view is the code behind your GUI. Your controller, so I need to get information from the database. I have a database called learners for C#. In there I have one table called learner with our ID, our name, address, and our age. So the learner DAO controls what comes from the database and what's sent back to the view. This controller class, it will go off and it will ask to get all of the, select all of the learners from the database. So if there are many learners in the database, it will look at each row. It will get the ID, the name, address, and the age. And what it needs to do is add them into like a container, an array, a list of learners. But instead of adding in, an int name, address, and an age, another int name, address, and age, and so on, what it does is it gets these 4 bits of data. It converts them into this learner object, and it's the learner object that gets added into the list. So if I draw, sorry, this won't be the best diagram, but this is going to be a list. Say I have 5 learners in my database. So it's a list with 5 elements in it. The first item in the list would refer to, say, Mr. John Murphy. So that's one learner. So John Murphy, this will have an ID, a name, address, and an age, and will be stored in the first element in the list. Say the next row in the database is Mary. So Mary's ID, name, address, and age will be converted into a learner object, and then it will be added to this list. So say that would be Mary, and so on. So the get all learners, that method, that will get called from behind my view. I'm probably going to put this code in behind the constructor. So a method that's the exact same name as my form, that's the constructor. The constructor is going to ask for the DAO class to get all learners from the database. That will go off, as I said, to the database, select all of the rows that are there, take each row, convert it into a learner object, and then add that object to the list. And finally, it will return this list back to the view. And it doesn't return the whole list, it actually returns a link to the area of memory of where that exists. And up here in my variables, so it's a link to the DAO class, so that's our DAO class there. This list of learners, this will be a pointer to where that list is in memory, an address to where that list is in memory. And then once it has that list, I'm going to call another method here from behind the constructor. I'm going to have a method here called Populate text boxes, and that Populate text boxes will go to my list, get the first person out, get the details from, it'll be a learner object. So I've just noticed I haven't added in the whole learner there. There will be properties there for ID, name, address, so that needs to be a little bit longer there. So it'll have the name, the address and the age there as well. So when I'm populating the text boxes, we'll get that learner, and then it will basically retrieve the properties and it will populate them. So from this, it will populate the ID. It will also get the name from here, populate the name. It'll populate that address text field or text box, and it will populate that age text box. So that's what's going to happen in the background. So for that, already I'll have this code file behind the GUI, but there won't be anything in it. I need to click on each button to create the event version, write the code there. I don't have the learner DAO. I'm going to start off with get all learners, and I also don't have the learner model. So I'm going to start by creating my learner model, and then I'll have get all learners, and then finally once I have that, I'll be able to write the code behind my form to actually call this method, because it will exist. It creates learner objects, a list of learner objects, so I'll need the learner. So the next step now is to create my learner class. Now back in Visual Studio on my project, I'm going to right click and add in a class. Now, so a class is a template for creating objects, so I'm going to call it a singular learner. So once I have one learner class, I can use it to create my learner objects, like, John Murphy and Mary Murphy with their details. Now, so what I want to add in here are the properties that make up that class, so it'll kind of be a match for what's in the database. So my first property, so public, be an int for the ID. Now if I open curly bracket, it'll prompt there to put in a getter and a setter, so that allows me to set a value to the ID and also to retrieve a value from the ID. So these would be properties very similar to the text property that you have on a GUI for all of the controls. Now I like the way it's suggesting a string for the name. Yes, I'd like that, please. And another public property here is going to be a string, and I'm going to call it address, and getter and setter, and one more property, an int for the age, and also a get and a set there. Now I accidentally put in a semicolon up there. Now I'm going to add in a constructor, because the constructor will allow me to set up learner objects with all of the values set at once, and then I could be able to add them to the list. So constructor is always the same name as the class. Now we won't have round brackets, but what I will take, or won't be empty round brackets, it will take in an int for the ID, comma, a string for the name, a string for the address, and an int for the age. Now what it needs to do is assign to the ID property, assign the ID value that's passed in, to the name property, assign the name that's passed in. I love the way it suggests everything for me, and tab on that one. Now, so that's my constructor that I will be using quite a lot to, when I retrieve from the database, I'll send all the information that I get from a row, from the table in the database, I'll send it in here, that will create a learner, and then I'll be adding that learner to my list. Now, finally, what I'm going to put in is a toString down the bottom. I'll be using this mainly for testing purposes to make sure that everything is okay. Now, so it'll be public. I'm going to override the toString. Now I'm going to add in something a little bit more meaningful than what's there. Now I'm going to be adding several new lines, so I put in here a string called new line. That will be equals environment dot new line. So once I create a learner object, I will be calling this toString, or I'll just be printing out the learner object to make sure that everything was retrieved okay from the database and is set up okay in the learner object. So this is my toString. So it's recommended every class that you write, that like with the properties included, that you would have a toString. So what's in here is it'll print out the ID is, whatever the ID is for it. So ID 1, followed by a new line, name is say John Murphy, address is at 1 Main Street, County Cork, age is whatever there. So that's my toString. So that is my learner class complete, and that is the model part of my project. Now I want to create the learner DAO class. So I've added that in already, and so into my project what I did was I right clicked and went to add a class, and I called it learner DAO. So I have that done here. Now I want to add in firstly a connection, so a variable to hold the connection. Now if I type in here, I'm going to have a private, I'm going to have read only, so once it's assigned a value it cannot, I won't change it by accident. Now SQL connection is not available here, so what I need is to include the namespace. It's system.data.sql client, and now I will be able to declare an SQL connection and give it a name there, connection. Now for the connection I need to put in the data source, so what the SQL Server name is that I'm using, what catalog is it, what database it is, and then what type of security. Now there's an easy way to do this. I'm going to use the data source window to get this information for me. So add a new data source. It's coming from a database into a data set. Now this will be blank the first time that you open it up, so you'll need to click on a new connection, a drop down there for the server name. So that might come back with nothing there, so what I recommend you do is just put a full stop, and that will connect to the SQL Server on your machine. And now if you notice here, this is populated down the bottom, so I'll be able to see all of the databases that I have on my SQL Server. Now I want to connect to their learners for C#. Now Windows Authentication means that it will log on to SQL Server using the same username and password that I logged on to this PC when I started it up. So you can hit test connection, but if you get that far it should be okay, and click OK. Now I can show the connection string here. It's exactly that I want to copy and paste there into my code there in the background. So I can copy that. I'll show you where to get it if you forget to copy that or if you lose it. So the connection is going to be saved there in a property, and I'll show you where that is. Now, so choose your database object. So you can expand tables there, but we only have one, so just the learners table, and click on finish. Now in the Solution Explorer window you will see an app.config file. So that is where the connection string is stored. So if you didn't get a copy from the wizard, you can take a copy from here. So copy that, and then I'm going into the DAO class, and I want to assign that value that I've copied to that connection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in a constructor so that when I create an instance of this class in the constructor code, it will assign a value to that connection. So connection equals, equals new SQL connection. So here I'm initializing, I'm setting up that SQL connection object, and curly brackets, and in here then there's a property of that SQL connection string, and it's to that equals, I want double quotes, and that's where I'm going to paste in what I copied there from that app config file. Now if you want to, you can hit return there in the middle of that somewhere just to make it easier to read. And let's have a look at this. Now I need a semicolon as well at the end of those curly brackets. Now, so if connection strings of data source equals dot, that means the SQL Server on this machine that I'm working on. Initial catalog, that's the name of the database that I created called Learners to C#, and integrated security, so it's using the same username and password that I logged onto this machine this morning to log on to SQL Server. And that is my connection string. Now I'm going to create a method to get all the learners from the database. So it's going to be public so that I can access it from behind my form. It's going to return a list now of, it's helping me out here, a list, and the angle brackets there are generics to say that this list will only contain learner objects, and that tells the compiler, make sure I don't put anything else in that list. Or that list that I'm returning, it'll only contain learner objects, make sure nothing else goes into it. So here, get all learners. And now what else I'm going to add in here, so return a new list is going to help me out here. Now I want to take in an output variable. I'm going to return, that allows me to return a value to say if it was successful in getting learners from the database. So it's going to return a list of learner objects, and it's going to return whether it was successful retrieving everything from the database. Worst case scenario, it might return an empty list if it didn't work. Now, the reason that this is underlined here, the modifier public is not valid, I've put this method in the wrong place. So I've put it inside my constructor. So it should be outside my constructor. So I'm just going to move that. Cut it out there and just put it there. So the constructor is a special kind of method, and now this is my other method. So that's a little bit better. Now, the first thing I'm going to do here is declare an empty list. So a list containing learner objects only. So again, the angle brackets are generics to make sure the compiler only allows me to add learner objects into it. I'm going to call this list of learners, and to set it up in memory there equals a new list. Again, generics, make sure that learner objects in it only, and semicolon. Now, what I would recommend here as well, I'm going to put in a console.writeLine, console.wl, shortcut there for writeLine, just to say that I'm in the get all learners method, just so if something doesn't work, at least I get a printout to see how far I've gotten. Now, I don't like code that doesn't compile, so what I'm going to do here is put in the last thing that this method will do is return the list of learners. So that will just make it compile there first of all. As well, I need to assign that output parameter success just before, so I need to say success equals true. I'm going to leave that for the moment, just while I write the rest of the code here. Now I've typed in comments here for all the steps that we have to do. So just read down to 1, declare a list to hold the results. 2, we need an SQL command object that will contain the select statement. 3, we're going to open the connection. 4, we're going to execute that command that has a select, which will return a data reader. So we need to declare a data reader object to hold the results. Number 5 there, loop through the data reader, all the rows in the data reader. Number 6, turn each row into a learner object. 7, add each learner to the list. Number 8, if execution gets here, well then everything's gone okay, so we're going to assign true to that success parameter. 9, if anything goes wrong, then we're going to have a catch here, so we're going to have a try catch out of all of this. Plenty can go wrong when you're connected to the database, and it will throw there an SQL exception. So we're going to catch that SQL exception, print out whatever has gone wrong, and then we're going to assign false to that success parameter. Finally, close the connection, literally in a finally block, and really finally return the list there back to the calling code. Okay, so first thing here, declare an SQL parameter, SQL command object, SQL command object, command. Oh, sorry, I'm just trying to use the autocomplete, it's not going so well. I'll just type it, command equals new SQL command. Now this curly bracket block here is known as an object initializer. So I'm setting up an object. Normally you could pass parameters into the constructor, and then you could say command dot set connection command dot, or command dot connection command dot command text. But here with this object initialization block, you can just list the properties that you want to set for that command. So what we need to tell it is we need to tell the command what the connection is. So that's the global variable I have up there. So connection equals connection, and then comma, and there the next one is the command text. So that is our SQL text. So select star from learners. Select star from learners. And then we just need a semicolon there at the end because it is one statement. So that's our SQL command. Now the next thing, open the connection. And I forgot there as well, this could go wrong all over the place. So what I want to do is pop a try block here. So I'm saying try all of the following code. I'm aware that something might and will go wrong if you're new to databases. So I'm going to put that curly bracket down there, and then we're going to put in a catch. So I'll pop that in there now. I don't like what it has suggested, and it's a general exception, but I will catch here SQL exception. There is something has gone wrong. Now SQL exception, okay, that's in a different namespace there, so I think it's using system.data. Just see if that has changed that. System.data. No, the problem is I spelled it wrong. Small QL. Okay, I'll get back to that and finish that there in a minute. Okay, open the connection number 3. So we're going to have, my connection is global there. It's called connection.open, or connection.open. So execute the command. So that will be command.execute reader. Now that will return an SQL data reader object, so I need to declare that on the same line. So execute reader. So here it is an SQL data reader, and I'll just call it a data reader. Equals, so it'll be returned there from executing the reader. Now loop through the reader. So that is while data reader dot read. So it advances the reader to the next record there if there is one. Now in here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a learner object from, so the data, firstly the data reader. When I say select star from learners, that will give back all of the learners from the database in a collection of rows. And the data, I want to read each row and I want to turn it into a learner object. So learner, I'm doing all this in as little as code there as possible. Learner equals new learner. Now again, I'm using that object initializer. In the next line I'm putting curly brackets, semicolon there at the end of the curly bracket, and now a learner is made up of ID equals, I'm getting this value from the reader, so it's going to be data reader square brackets ID. It's helping me out there. Now I think in the database it's small d, I don't think it matters. Now the data reader will return it'll return an object data type, so I just need to convert that into an int. So what I can do there is put a cast before it. I know that the ID is an int in the database, but data reader, when it reads a column or a value, it will return an object. So I just need to carry this on then. So name equals, and if you just use it to 2022 is very helpful. I don't have to type a lot of it in. Address equals data reader. It's not helping me in this one though. Data reader, square brackets address. Again, that I just need to put a cast there to a string, and one more. Age, little age there. Now that's just gone to lowercase age. I'm just going to go and check my learner class to see age does not exist in the current context. There's a lowercase a. Okay, I just need to change that. Now, okay, we'll go again here. Looks better. Equals and data reader square brackets, and the name of the column there, double quotes, is age, and that returns an object, but I know I want it to be an int, so that will create a learner object. Now, when you get this error that there's no argument given that corresponds to the required form parameter, basically this code here calls the constructor for a learner that takes no parameters, and then it goes ahead and calls the setter for the ID and the name and so on. And if you don't have that constructor for the learner class with no parameters, this is where it'll give an error here. So you want to go to your learner. You want to pop in a constructor public, so it can be called from the other class, same name as the class learner, with no parameters there and empty curly brackets. Just hit save on that, go back to your learner DAO, and that will fix the problem there. Now, so that is number 6 done. Turn each row into a learner object. Number 7, add each learner to the list. My list I have here, it's called list of learners. So here, list of learners dot add. Now I might have a little problem here. Learner, okay, I've declared the learner inside in the while, and I'm trying to do this outside the while, so it can't see the learner. So what I just need to do is move this in here. Now we should be able to see that variable name there, learner, yeah. And now what I will do as well, just to see if this has worked so far, just do a console.writeLine. Console.writeLine. I'm just going to print out the learner, and we should see a load of learners being printed out if this is working okay. And now if execution gets here, assign success, semicolon missing there, assign true to the success parameter, success equals true. Now if anything goes wrong, catch the exception, print out the problem and assign it. So this is all down here. So here again, console.writeLine. So if it gets here, it's going to output here an exception occurred. Now, and in here I want to concatenate the exception on there, just the exception that we printed, everything that's gone wrong there. And also in here, if it gets as far as here, then something's gone wrong, so success is false, and that should be it. And finally return the list. Okay, this is a fantastic method, but it won't do anything until I call it. So get all learners, I need to call it from behind my GUI. Now, so behind my form, I'm just going to right click here and view code. So what I'm going to do is create global variables here that can be used behind all of the buttons. So firstly, I'm going to have a reference to the list of learner objects. So that is going to be list of learners. And that's going to be returned from the DAO class. It's going to populate, get the learners from the database and return it. And I will be assigning it to that list. So set up a new empty list there first of all. New list learner, call the constructor, sorry. Now I also need a reference to the DAO class, so that's going to be private. The data type of it is learner DAO. It's going to call it DAO and just instantiate it here as well, so that will allow me to use it. New learner DAO and call the constructor. Now and then when the form is created, it will call initialize components, which set up all the buttons and labels onto the form. And now it's here that I need to access that DAO. Okay, so DAO dot, oops. DAO.get all learners. I need to pass in there the output parameter, bool success. So that will be given a value there when it returns, or whether it was successful or not. And it will return also the list of learners. So I need to assign that to the list of learners. And now what I can write is I can see if it was successful, if success, then I'm just going to pop in a message box here as well, message box.show. It worked, so we'll get back to this and complete it possibly in the next video, because this one's getting a little bit long. Otherwise here, message box.show error connecting to the database. Connecting to the database. Now, so I'm just going to test this out, and then in the next video I will go ahead there, and if it's successful there, I'll populate. I'll add in a new method and populate all the text boxes there on the form. So just to run this and see how we get on. Now, so we can see there the message box popped up there to say that it worked. And if I look in the output window down below, I can see from the DAO class, every time I got a learner, I printed out the contents there. So that called the toString in the learner class. I'll just show you that there before I finish this tutorial. So in the learner class, or sorry, the DAO class, this one here, in the DAO class where I created a learner out of everything that came from the database, I added the learner to the list. That print line there is printing out a learner, but what it does, it goes to the toString in the learner class and it gives back, prints out, it returns a string containing all this information from each learner as it prints out. So there's nothing there on the form yet because I haven't written that code. So in the next video, I will show you how to get the information there from that list and populate the fields on the form.